privacy, licensing, and policy. We're going to cover these three areas and go over the basics of what you need to know as an IT professional in each of these areas. So let's go ahead and get started. As an IT professional, you are expected to know a reasonable amount of information concerning the law and regulations. IT professionals often deal with software licensing and personally identifiable information, or sometimes encounter prohibited activity or have to deal with a security incident. You should understand and have the general principles related to these concepts. The importance of policies. A policy is the most important part of dealing with prohibited content, behaviors, or actions that an individual or group of individuals have in an organization. With the policy in place that specifically defines what is and what isn't allowed and what actions will be taken when a violation occurs, if you don't have those in place, you don't have a complete policy. That what contains in a policy is basically it depends on the organization, the organizational goals, and what they're trying to accomplish. But you will find policies throughout all the type of organizations that you may come across. And it's crucial and important that all employees should be aware of and receive proper training on these policies as well as having some type of sign off. There may be a training of some sort that employees may have to go to understand what's expected and what's not expected in that organization. Incident responses. Whenever there is a violation or something happens that goes against a policy or guidelines within an organization, that's an incident. And detecting an incident could come of different ways. It could be a passive detection, and that's used it may clue in as far as reviewing logs or content or events, and you may discover an incident that way. It could be through active detection. It's used to actively look for security incidents or policy violations. There could also be a proactive detection in the act of proactive securing possible holes in security. A detection could be made that way as well. Regardless of the how it was detected, responding to the incident is important. Once an incident is detected using the prior methods that was mentioned, it's time to jump into action and respond to that incident. The evidence must be collected, and the order of volatility should be followed. The order of volatility is basically in the order that evidence will deteriorate or disappear. And that order is first, if it's involving a digital, like a computer or something like that, you want to go for the memory, retain what's in the memory. Then the swap files or the virtual memory, the network processes, system processes, file system information, and raw disk blocks. Again, the order of volatility is basically whatever's going to deteriorate first. You want to get that information first before it's no longer available. It can become no longer available if a computer is rebooted, if the cache is cleaned. So those are the urgent or orders that you should get your information for your evidence for your investigation. Chain of custody is another important concept in your investigation. Depending on the situation, materials may be held in a safe, locked location in an office where they may need to be turned over to local authorities. It's important to have a documented procedure in place given the situation of who and what was in charge of that material or that evidence and whose custody it was in. So the chain of custody documentation should define the following: who obtained the evidence, who secured the evidence, who controlled the evidence during the process. Sometimes you have to use hash algorithms to validate the integrity that it didn't get changed. And you also need to label and catalog that information. If it's a digital data, digital signatures to ensure, again, integrity, that it did not get changed at all. If it's a drive involved, some type of hard drive, you need to copy that hard disk because it's again part of the evidence. You want to remove the drive using a hardware write blocker that it doesn't write to that drive. You want to preserve it just the way it is so nothing can happen to that drive. You want to use a type of software imaging tool and possibly a bootable device. And again, use hashes to verify data integrity once you get that copy. Critical part as far as the investigation and the incident's response is your documentation. Before, during, after the incident, the documentation process should begin. You should collect as much information as possible, as a formal incident report will eventually be formulated defining the following key elements. Your documentation should include the date, the time of the incident, a summary or overview of the incident, detailed explanation of acquiring the data, the root cause and actions taken, as well as a conclusion. Oftentimes in an organization, you're going to come across and deal with software licenses. Now, there's different concepts of licenses that you need to be aware of. A valid license is any software license that is current and not counterfeit or has not expired. Again, non expired licenses is a perpetual, non expiring type of license, usually for the life of the software that you would use that type of license. You may come across a personal use license, and this could be on a lot of different software and materials. Personal use licenses are designed for home or single use and not for a corporation. But there are going to be specific commercial use or corporate use enterprise licenses that permits an organization to install an application on an agreed upon number of devices. And this is normally called a per seat. Sometimes you'll see annual renewals with these enterprise and corporate licenses as well. Digital rights management is an important concept you should be aware of also. Digital rights management is basically companies rely on a DRM to protect digital assets. It dictates what paying customers can do with that material that they use. Now, this includes technologies that limit the copying and the use of copyrighted material. Now, some authors and creators, publishers use codes that limit the time or the number of devices or content that can be accessed from. It also prevents users from saving, sharing, and printing. If you've had like digital ebooks or something like that, you can use them for a limited time, and it prevents from printing or it may have limited printing. You won't be able to save it or export it to a PDF or anything like that because there is a digital rights management agreement on that type of content that only allows you certain type of usage for that type of content. Open source is the type of license you'll come across. Open source license is free. Not only is the application free, but the source code, the code used by programmers, is also shared to encourage others to contribute to the future development and improvement of that application. So that source code is freely available to modify. Individuals can compile their own executables with that open source software. Now, on the other hand, there's closed source commercial software. This source code is proprietary. End users gets a pre-compiled executable. And that also has limitations what you can do with that software, like we spoke of earlier. End user license agreement or EULA. This defines and outlines how software is to be used when it becomes in your possession. Also, you'll come across regulated data, specifically in the area of credit card data. The payment card industry, or PCI DSS, is a organization that oversees the PCI DSS rules and regulations. It's a standard of processes and procedures used to protect data related to transactions used in payment cards. Now, this is not enforced by a government entity or government agencies, but actually, this is credit card companies that have a basic governance of how PCI DSS transactions are to occur. Now, the PCI DSS objectives are not covered in the CompTIA exam. However, these are the objectives that you should just be aware of for future use. Build and maintain a secure network system. Protect cardholder data. Maintain a vulnerability management program. Implement strong access control measures. Regularly monitor and test your networks, and maintain an information security policy. Those are regulation guidelines and objectives that the PCI DSS organization has put forth for its users. Personal government or issued information. Sometimes any personal information contained in a document issued by the government or state is considered personal government issued. Examples of government issued documents are birth certificates, social security cards, driver's license, resident card, taxpayer ID information. All this information is considered private information and need to be protected. There may be restrictions on collecting or storing government information. Verify with local regulations. Also, you want to be aware of the term PII, which is personally identifiable information. Any data that can be used to identify an individual, personal data can become routine and given freely. Even users, their own information may give it freely. You want to handle personal data with care. Keep it confidential and safe. As an IT professional, you're going to come across a lot of this information. You're going to come across a lot of information that people use on a routine basis, but it's up to you as the professional to make sure you keep it confidential and safe because this is a big target for attackers for malicious use. They use it for exploitation or they may use it for impersonation. This is how identity theft happens by not keeping that information confidential and safe. Also, protected health information or PHI. This is information used in the healthcare identity of a person and its own on its own or in the context with other information, like their health status, their records or payment information for healthcare. Now, this also could be data in between providers. This must maintain the same security requirements. This information must be protected. And this is where the HIPAA regulations come into play. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. Also, you're going to come across data retention requirements. Data storage depends on the type of data and the longevity and how long that data is supposed to be retained. Different reasons for retaining data. Adhering to retention requirements shields the company from liability. Often legal requirements for data retention, like regulations and so forth. Some organizations must legally store certain documents. Organizations may need to retain memorandums, access control records, video footage, etc. So you'll come across different types of data retention requirements. And again, it depends on the industry and the organization that they're in. Okay, in this lesson, we talked about at a high level three different important areas that you need to be aware of. We talked about the incident response, chain of custody, and how that works. Also, the licensing area, digital rights management, and a different type of licenses. We also talked about regulated data, credit card transactions, personal government, PII, and PHI. I want to thank you for being with me on this lesson, and I will see you in the next lesson.